increase. And to that extent, it is a very healthy trend because casual workers are the poorest workers in the country. And another aspect which I would like to point out that wage pattern, growth of wage pattern, the casual wages or even real wages mostly has in the bottom 40%, the increase is much more compared to the higher level. So wage distribution in India has improved compared to earlier years. But I'm not talking about income distribution. I'm talking about wage distribution between 5 quintiles in India. It has improved because the lowest workers, casual workers, they have improved rather significant increase compared to the higher category of workers. So this is a rather positive trend. A structural transformation. You know that this is a very hotly debated topic in development literature, that India has not achieved a structural transformation. There was, in the report, we have a chapter, rather third chapter goes into detail about it, the drivers of a structural change. Of course, it has been quite slow, but there has been slow and a steady structural transformation taking place in India. Slow, moving from agriculture to services and construction, not to industry, not to manufacturing. This has been happening. But suddenly, after again 2008-2009, this has been halted. Because this rise in share of agricultural employment is quite high. In fact, rise in agricultural employment is more than the rise in agricultural productivity. Agricultural output. So, quality of agricultural employment must have deteriorated. So, this is a somewhat worrying trend because people going to agriculture rather more and more. Why it has happened? Because of the COVID, mostly because of the COVID. But I think this is a transitional phase and we will return to the old phase. In the report, we have constructed a employment structure index. This index consists of 6 types of employment considered. Seven variables: percentage of workers engaged in regular formal work, percentage of casual laborers, percentage of self-employed workers belonging to poverty line, work participation rate, average monthly earnings of casual workers, unemployment rate of secondary and more educated workers, and need. We experimented with several other variables, but lastly we thought of in which this index preparation, Dr. Manna, myself, Ravi, Sher, several rounds of discussions. And then we came out with this table. Just you can see, this is a state-wise table. The first point is that since 2005, we have given 2005 and 2021-22. Quality of employment in all states of India at varying degree has improved. Everywhere, which is evident from the increase in the scope. But another important point is that in 2005, states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, they were at the bottom. And even now they are at the bottom. Some developed states, Delhi, Himachal, Uttarakhand, Gujarat, they were on the top, still they are top there. But there have been movement in between. So this is a very interesting pattern which has emerged and which throws light on the persistence of the dynamics at a regional level labor market in the country.
Thanks to all of you for coming here today for this release. I'll be dealing with the chapters on youth employment, skill training, and basically focusing on the youth part of the report, which is in a sense the crux of the focal area of this particular report. I just wanted to point out that the years that we've taken for comparison, we've taken 2000, 2011-12, and then we've taken 2018-19 because that is the last pre-COVID year for purposes. But many of the trends that we observed actually began in the earlier year, began in 17-18, but we have not talked about 17-18 specifically. And then of course in most cases we go up to 2023, 22, in some cases only up to 21-22 because of the lack of time that we had to revise the report comprehensively after the latest NSSO report, LFS report came out. So I think the first point, general point, which is well understood is that India has a brief period of opportunity, window of opportunity open to it over the next decade, where we will still see an expansion in the ratio of the working force, the proportion of the working age population in this country. And this is a period in which we can potentially exploit our demographic dividend. And that is why there is an urgency on this whole question of youth employment in particular. Electronics education layers. Initially, agriculture employment among youth declined quite significantly up to 2019 by 36.4 million. Industry expanded, but mainly due to expansion in construction, and service area expanded quite significantly. But over the last few years, agriculture expanded very significantly. Agricultural employment among youth by 14.4 million. Industry expanded, but mostly due to construction. Manufacturing employment was virtually stagnant, increasing only by 1.7 million. Service sector employment among youth were also more or less stagnant, increasing only by 1.8 million. So the rapid expansion in employment of youth that took place in recent years was mainly due to agricultural employment. Now, as far as quality of employment is concerned, the quality of employment among youth, and this is the youth, of course, speaking about averages, is worse than the quality of employment among adults. This probably has to do with also lesser experience in the job market that they have. So we find, of course, that there's a great deal of informality and so on. But although the share of youth in the formal sector tended to be higher than that of adults in general, what we find again is that concurrent again with the adult population in the overall labor force, we find that after 2019, the share of formal employment declined, the share of formal sector employment declined, regular employment declined, regular formal employment declined, and so on. But of course, as jobs were shed from the contractual temporary jobs were shed from the formal sector, the share of formal jobs within the formal sector, which did increase over the last few years. Again, coming back to the self-employed, there was a great deal of expansion in self-employment among youth, as also happened with the overall population rate, and this mostly happened in the sphere of unpaid family employment. So that unpaid workers increased very significantly over this period of time. As far as real earnings are concerned, if you look at the real earnings among youth, the regular self-employment, whether you look at regular wage employment or self-employment, youth's real earnings were either stable or marginally declined, and although there was a small increase in casual wages in recent years after 2019. Now, technological change and digitalization are very rapidly affecting the demand for skills for certain types of employment among youth. and we will say a little more about skills among youth. However, the proportion of high and medium skilled jobs is greater among youth than older people. So there is a greater proportion of youth who are concentrated in medium and high skills. Although, as we shall see, the proportions are actually quite low. In services and to a lesser extent in manufacturing, youth are more likely to be in high and medium skilled jobs. Young people are also better represented in the gig and platform economy, where, however, jobs remain very insecure. Now, looking at the skill composition of youth, if you look at the first figure in this, the skill composition of youth has increased, but it has not increased by much. If you look at the share of youth in high and medium skilled jobs, this share increased from about 8% to about 14.9% over the 2022 year period. So the majority of youth, that is 85% youth, even in 2022, were either in unskilled or in low skilled jobs. And this, as we shall also show later, is an area of major concern because the aspiration of jobs of youth to be in medium and high skilled jobs has been consistently increasing with increasing education among them. The need, as far as the youth not in education, employment or training is concerned, their share is not only very high, but has also increased from 29.9% in 2000 to 33.4% in 2019. But it reversed after 2019 and decreased to 28.5% in 2022. So there's, as you know, as certain other feature labor market changes took place between 2019 and 2022, the share of the youth did decline a little bit. There's a high share of females in need. Their share actually is around 5 times that of their males. And basically, the need youth fall in 2 categories: the unemployed youth and the youth who are out of the labor force. And this, of course, requires different strategies, as we also point out later on. Now, we come to the chapter on education and levels of education and educational skills and so on, and the question in relation to employment. And basically, between 2000 and 2009 and 22-23, we find that there has been a rapid improvement in access to education, in education attainment among youth, with the share of youth with secondary and above education and also with graduate education actually rising quite rapidly. Down to the role that the institutions that have been set up in the last 25 years have been playing. We have looked in the report at the skill development programs, the major skill development programs, and the apprenticeship programs, the new apprenticeship programs as well. And we note that actually the achievement among the major skill development, the PMKY is the umbrella program, which is now in its 4th version in India, have been very good in relation to the goals and the targets which have been set over time. The major issues that have been pointed out by committees are target shortfall, dropout rates, low placement of trained youth, and mismatches between supply, continued mismatches between supply and demand. As far as the apprenticeship programs are concerned, again, the participation of industry is still very low, and his target achieved relatively small in the apprenticeship programs. The major challenges to skill development and training are analyzed in this report, and there are 4. The first is the obvious one, that there is very limited uptake of training, both due to supply and demand side constraints. Shortage of trainers in infrastructure, inadequate industry partnership, low service training, and hence low demand. Against a target of nearly 40 million trainees a year, which was set by in the national policy document, the actual achievement has been less than 2.5 million. Spatial imbalances in the provision of training programs. There is an urgent need for training in states which have a youth bulge. But yet it is precisely in these states that training capacity and demand are low.
Now, coming back to the report, sorry for that little detour, to recognise when we look at the policy agenda, as already been pointed out, in the case of India, there's been a lot of action by the government at all levels and other partners to address many of these issues. So when we talk about the policy agenda, it's not that there is a vacuum. Indeed, as already noted, there are many initiatives that are there to address the issues around the demand side, job creation, skilling, entrepreneurship, etc. So that's, I think, a very important caveat I just would like to make. A second caveat, which is obvious to this audience, also obvious in the analysis, is that when we speak of India, there's no one agenda. There is, of course, important issues set at the central level, but fundamentally, as you know, and as also shown in the report, there are real issues, differences at the state level that also will require different types of policy agendas. Not all states will be the manufacturing powerhouses, and we see big changes happening currently in some states, very promising changes that I think we'll see, major changes also in the labour market in the coming years. But other states will need to rely on other sectors. I mean, it's important caveat. So let me just come to what's been set out in the report in terms of the policy agenda. And we've already taken up quite a bit of your time, and we would like to, of course, hear from our eminent guests. So I won't go into all the details, but you can see it is structured around five dimensions. It's a comprehensive policy agenda, which is not surprising given the complexity of those issues you heard about. And there's no one policy response that's going to solve any of those. The first one deals with job creation. So making production and growth more employment intensive. It's about the overall job creation agenda, linked to the macro and sectoral policies to boost productive non-farm employment. In particular, looking at the role of modern manufacturing and service sector. The report does highlight certain sectors, and of course already sectors have been identified in the Indian context in terms of the Make in India strategy, but also the incentives, the PLI, for example, etc., to support the new sectors. And they will play a very important role in creating jobs. But obviously, as said, for different states, this will pan out in different ways. In addition to the overall sort of macro sectoral, the role of embassies is critical when it accounts for the vast majority of employment in this country, as it does in most countries of this level of development, and therefore that role continues to be absolutely critical to solve the job story. Agriculture's come up a lot, and I think this is one of those new puzzles has been debated a lot, but I think it's also interesting to note, you see this in a few other countries, it is not unique in this increase in agricultural employment in this post-COVID period. I believe it needs a lot more careful analysis also from a broader perspective. But clearly the issue of agricultural productivity remains a key priority. But in addition, the report notes the opportunities there are to expand and invest in the green and blue economies, and also the important role of technology in that whole space. The second policy agenda is looking at the quality of jobs. This is more focusing on regulation, promoting more decent, productive employment, particularly for youth, reference to care, digital, but also other sectors. And of course, in this respect, very important steps have been made in the country in terms of the labour codes and other efforts to regulate employment. But of course, there continues to be the challenge of the informal economy that really is the one that needs to be addressed through that. And the access to social protection that has been a major goal of the government has been important in that regard. So there's also under that policy agenda mission, I don't have time to go into all the details, but it also refers to important of urbanization and migration policy. Because if you look at this whole story of structural transformation, it's not just about sectors, it's about where people are working. And even when I was based in India, there was a lot of discussion about, how jobs can be created in those smaller towns, the tier 2, tier 3 towns, their role within the broader structural transformation process. So it's also correct to also highlight that, also not just from the job creation, but the quality of job story. And the overall issue around minimum quality and basic rights of work through the regulation. A range of inequalities, and there are many issues there. I won't go into all the details, they're in the report. But there are two I want to flag, because they're ones that are very familiar to, but are very critical in this context. And that's firstly, of course, boosting women's participation in the labour market. This has been an issue that has been very much debated, discussed. I know a lot of efforts have been made by the government as well on this area, but it is a very complex issue, as you know, and it involves addressing a range of demand and supply side issues, also social norms, a very complex set of factors, and the report does flag a number of those, including care, access to public transport, amenities, workplace safety, and these etc. The other one is, the second one that I want to flag is these young needs. Because I think they really are very important. So these young people who are not in employment, education or training. So that includes the unemployed, but it also includes those outside the labour force. So that, and as said, as you know, these are mostly women. I think it was 95% are women of on that category. And that is of course very much linked to the first issue about women's participation. But I think this is where experience of other countries has shown that very targeted but integrated, comprehensive approaches are needed to tackle those problems. It's not as straight. Experience indicates it's much more complex to deal with those problems for young NEETs than it is for just the narrower group of unemployed. I mean, they are part of the NEET, but those non-unemployed NEETs are in particular need those different strategies to tackle. That mission also covers other areas, including education and the digital divide, other forms of discrimination, and fundamentally a regional level policy approach, which is critical, I think, across all these missions. But it's given the regional inequalities that have been noted is very pertinent here. Just let me move then on to the fourth mission. And here we're of course more on the side of the supply in terms of skill, training, active labour market policies, and a lot has happened in this country. Obviously, this has been a major priority for a number of years. The report highlights some steps in terms of further strengthening the skills ecosystem, job search, counselling, and of course I think that the challenges as well as having that integrated approach and how you link those also for the most vulnerable groups in the labour market. My colleague Umar Rani is here, one of our leading experts on this area, doing a lot of work in this country as well. It's understanding better through access to data and statistics on what's happening with gig and labour platform economy. We will need to monitor what's happening through technological change, AI. I think we have to be realistic about what's happening there, but nonetheless, this is one of the key challenges in the coming years. So we need to look at new data forms, data sources, and forms of data to complement what comes through the official sources as well. And I think a very important area that can be further explored is the use of administrative data for better analysis in terms of what's going on in the labour market. So on this point, let me stop here because I know we have some very eminent speakers and guests to give us their insights on this topic. But thank you very much for your attention.
To launch of the report, I request our chief guest, Dr. Anand Nageshwaran, to kindly launch the report, and also all the people on the dais to kindly join in launching the report. Yes, it is a photograph moment. I request all the report team contributors, the team members, to kindly come on and join the people here. We already have the team leaders, Professor Ravi Shrivastava, Professor Lakin Sharma, and Dr. Shade Singh Bade. Yes, this is the photographic moment. Calls for a round of applause. Indian Employment Report 2024, Youth Employment, Education and Skills, jointly brought out, prepared by Institute for Human Development and the International Labour Organization. Anand Nageshwaran, Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, to kindly address the gathering.
I hope the eminent personalities on the dais would forgive me for acknowledging their presence collectively rather than mentioning their names individually. I first of all begin by commending the report in terms of its timeliness, relevance, comprehensive coverage, wealth of data, the various surveys undertaken, the diagnosis of the issues, and above all, the underlying care and concern for the cause, which is youth unemployment. The report deserves praise for its breadth and depth. It puts a magnifying glass on the intricacies of labour market challenges, including opportunities and the issues to overcome. It also undertakes deep analysis through unit level data of various NSS surveys to come up with numbers on the percentage of workers not getting minimum wages, etc. Table 2.8, and the incidence of poverty, table 2.9, etc. And we also saw the attention to detail in the presentation that was shared with us a few minutes ago. The report is therefore quite long, comprehensive, and excellent on diagnostics, and somewhat, let me add, somewhat unsurprisingly, short on answers or specifics, except a few that I recall. One on including gig workers in more than one labor code, and on statistical data, administrative information systems on various dimensions of the labor market. As I said, it is not a lacuna, it is not a shortcoming, but that is the nature of the problem we are dealing with. Of course, in terms of statistical data and the ease of access, etc., I can add that those of us who are engaged in downloading labor market data from the website of the Labour Bureau in Chandigarh may be entitled to a hardship allowance. The reason why I said that the absence of specific solutions is not a complaint or a criticism but part for the course, I want to recall a film from 1970s when I was probably somewhere around 10-12 years of age. It was a movie which was first originally a play and then became a very famous movie, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, by the noted Tamil journalist, lawyer, actor Cho Ramaswamy. And in that play, he becomes a prime minister. Tughlaq, he comes as a Tughlaq, the emperor, and then he becomes a prime minister, and then he begins to address various problems, corruption, the national language issue, and then the unemployment problem. And for that, he simply says, look, all I will do is I will keep talking on every dais and every stage that we have to solve the unemployment problem. And that is my contribution to solving the unemployment problem. Because he said this is not something that I can address, I will simply say, I will say that this problem needs to be addressed urgently in every forum I'm invited to speak at. So the point therefore here is that I think there is an element of truth in what he said in that movie. We should ask ourselves, what can the government do on employment short of hiring massively by itself? Of course, I do agree that it can and must hire in some areas. In fact, according to a very good paper by Devesh Kapoor in the Journal of Economic Perspectives some time ago, India may be lacking in capacity. I'm not talking about capability, talking about capacity in terms of numbers in several areas. And numbers are indeed part of the solution in terms of government employment. But apart from that, to think that for every social or economic problem that there is a government intervention is not quite correct. We need to get out of that mindset. In the normal world, it is the commercial sector, those who engage in for-profit activity, who need to do the hiring. Therefore, let us think in terms of what are the facilitative actions that the government has taken in recent years, which the report also has acknowledged. One is, of course, skill development, and I note the comments in the report on how the skill development initiatives, numerous as they are, in terms of the demand and supply, the availability of instructors, and also the dropout rates, those are all issues that need to be addressed quite clearly. There is considerable scope for improvement, and I think the government is mindful of that. And of course, in spite of these challenges, which have been there for quite some time, the push to skill India has manifested in India's rising position in the world skill competitions from number 39 rank in 2011 to number 11 in 2022. Further, according to the India Skills Report 2023, the employable percentage of final year and pre-final year students has increased from 33.9% in 2014 to 51.3% in 2024. And combined with the rising enrollment in higher education, around 3.2 crores in 13-14 to 4.1 crores in 2021, the rising employability of graduates, as mentioned in the India Skills Report, implies that the workforce, young youth workforce, is expanding and is becoming increasingly employable. Although I do note that 51.3% employability means 48.7% still need to be covered. So we are aware of the other side of the story as well. And then what else the government has done apart from the skilling initiative? The new education policy is indeed an important structural reform in human development. Besides introducing the holistic multidisciplinary education with multiple entry and exit options, some of its key features include having no hard separation between vocational and academic streams, and the national credit framework for creditization of various dimensions of learning, academic, vocational, and experiential. The PM Shri schools launched in 2022 will demonstrate the implementation of the new education policy 2020, and these schools will emerge as role models for other nearby schools as well. Thus, NEP is to quality what Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan was to access, and therefore it is important that we also undertake efforts to make sure that this new education policy does not become postage to political considerations, because the NEP is quite futuristic in nature and acknowledges the challenges that Indian youth will face from technological developments as well, and therefore prepares them accordingly. So its implementation is a national priority. And apart from these two, I'm moving on to other contributions that the government has made. In the 2018-19 budget, the government announced that it will pay 12% of the employer's contribution for new employees for Employee Provident Fund Organization. The yearly net payroll addition to the EPFO therefore more than doubled from 61 lakhs in 18-19 to 139 lakhs in 22-23, bouncing back from the pandemic shock, also partly aided by the Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana. And there is a new income tax provision, 80JJAA, which allows weighted deduction for wages and salaries. It is there even in the new simplified alternative tax regime with fewer exemptions. This deduction has not been taken away in the new alternative tax regime available to tax assessees, corporate tax assessees. Indeed, we can state very confidently now. And then we also in this report go into the number of reports that need to be filed in hard copies, the number of approvals need to be taken at the Factories Act level, etc. So basically, I think this there is still a long way to go. While we have come a long way, there is still a long way to go in terms of reducing the compliance burden at the ground level. I already spoke about the importance of implementing new education policy. I won't go into that. That is my third area. And then the fourth area will be, I think, governments around the country and even around the world. Are they helping with their welfare policies that reduce the incentive to seek work? That is, in every public policy intervention, there is always the law of unintended consequences. In general, humans change their lifestyles and habits only when doctors read the right act on behalf of the human body. Does it not apply to our youth and others in respect of their willingness to work or efforts to equip themselves with skills and attitude towards work? Therefore, there needs to be a dispassionate and objective study on whether policies intended to ameliorate the negative consequences of unemployment end up disrupting the labor market for the worse. Now I come to the part which the report missed, that is the key players in job creation, that's the commercial sector. I came across an article in print recently about a woman who worked in the information technology sector, took maternity leave, became a mother, but could not re-enter the labor force. The article acknowledges that there is no dearth of policies that benefit women after childbirth. Women get paid maternity leave for 6 months after a 2017 amendment to the Maternity Benefit Act. It also covers work from home or hybrid work models. But there seems to be ingrained issues and prejudices in the corporate world, as the article notes. On paper, HR policies in the corporate world are not discriminatory against women, and companies do extol the benefits they provide. But according to the Maternity Benefit Act, companies with more than 50 employees should provide daycare facilities, but it has not been widely implemented. And the odds are stacked against women even before they get pregnant. If it is any consolation at all, it is not confined to India alone. A study in the UK concluded that nearly 1 in 5 HR managers are reluctant to hire women who may start families. According to the US-based National Bureau of Economic Research, on average, a quarter of women in the world will drop out of the workforce within a year of birth of their first child as a result of what they call, unfortunately, the motherhood penalty. So it is important to work persistently at the inertia and at the subtle or implicit resistance in the commercial sector, which is the feature of the workplace, even in large organizations, not only in India but elsewhere. And I could say the same thing about workplace exposure and training for students of tertiary education. This is about the apprenticeship training and exposure. The report mentioned that this is an area of improvement, and they are quite right. Over the years, the government has created many enabling provisions to facilitate the hiring of apprentices. under the National Apprenticeship Act Promotion Scheme, more than 25.5 lakh candidates have been trained since 2018-19 until October 23. But the gap persists, and the industry can and should do better. I do have one critical observation to make on this, on the issue of female labor force participation rate. As the report notes, is it indeed distress driven, as the report mentions repeatedly? I quote from the executive summary: the number of youth in self-employment expanded much more than in other categories of employment during the pandemic, which was mostly in household unpaid work, especially among rural women, and considered the worst form of employment.
I would also like to thank our chief guest, Anand Nageshwaran, for his insights into the report and his concerns about what should be done. Employment is India's biggest economic, social, and political challenge, not just for the past half century, but also for the next. And it lies at the heart of our aspirations to reap the demographic dividend. Whether or not we succeed will depend entirely on what we do in terms of employment creation. Just as it lies at the heart of Prime Minister Modi's aspiration for a developed India by 2047, an hour from now. That means we are still half an hour behind schedule. So I would request our distinguished panelists, and I'm sorry that Montek is unable to come, but he did also call me. He has a genuine problem with his knee and mobility. But we have three distinguished panelists with us, Rana Hassan, Sunita Sagi, and Bhattacharya. I would urge them, if possible, to set out their comments as panelists in 10 minutes each, or as close to it as possible, so that we have half an hour for question and answers from those who had the time and the patience to come here and to sit through it.
It's sure to be a very valuable resource for all stakeholders, including policymakers and researchers. It's been said already a number of times, not to belabor the point, but the analysis of micro records of the labor force surveys, the ASI data, national accounts data, the cleanse data is something that was very unique, but provided a lot of insights. Also, the issue of analyzing trends over a long period of time, 20 plus years. Finally, the report summarizes its findings and talks about policy implications in terms of 5 missions. So here, let me just provide a few thoughts on some of these issues. The first one was on regional variation, and the report does talk about how the different states are doing. And I thought here I would just share some work that I've been doing with a colleague of mine, and also just maybe point out that when you actually take India and categorize the states, you find the news is much more welcome. Now, certainly for the states which are doing better, but these bar charts, basically what they represent is they're trying to capture structural transformation in employment. They're trying to basically say, okay, look, what are the changes in employment that are taking place, and where is employment coming down, where is employment going up? And what you see is that the states that we have basically categorized as the leading states, the states basically which have had relatively high GDP growth over the last 5 to 7 years, are the ones where you're seeing this structural transformation taking place in the most accelerating fashion. That's over here in the blue bars. You can see that the biggest reductions in agricultural employment shares, and you're actually seeing that manufacturing share of employment is actually the one that is quite dramatic in these states. So in other words, while it's fine to look at India-specific numbers, this is a huge country. It's the largest country in the world. You have to think, you have to break it down into appropriate subnational levels. And the finding there, I think, is provides one hope that look, there are some good things happening in several places. What can we learn from them? Second issue that I want to just get to is the big question is, why aren't there more good jobs? And essentially, you have to think in terms of supply and demand. from the supply side of labor, essentially two things. One is skills. A worker supplies skills, and there's also this issue of matching of jobs and workers. So the supply side of labor, we can think in terms of the skills and matching issues, but you have to confront the reality that ultimately there's also the demand side. And I think probably it's not just for India, but for many developing countries, maybe even advanced countries, I think the general feeling is that when you look at these supplies and demand side issues, it's really the demand side of labor which is probably the main factor behind lack of jobs. And I'm not going to get into the details, but this is basically a set of points that have come through some very rigorous assessments of skills development programs. I know it's very fashionable to say let's have a skills development program, let's set up skilling centers here and there, but we have to remember that the design of these programs is extremely important. In fact, I looked a little bit at the literature, and there are some good studies out there which take the most rigorous evidence that is out there on skills development and the effectiveness they have from around the world. And essentially, the lessons seem to be, I've listed the lessons, you have to really think in terms of training that is market driven. And that sort of goes to the point the Chief Economic Advisor was making. The role of industry is critical. If we're setting up skilling centers in locations where there's not much, not many factories coming up, not many new business parks coming up, this is an uphill battle. You've got to pay attention to trainers, you've got to perhaps make payments for the delivery of these programs to results. There are many other things, I'm not going to go into them, but essentially you have to be very sensitive to demand. One thing I'll just say here from some of the experience we're having at ADB is that it's an interesting idea that where you provide skilling centers, do it in the locations where something new is happening. So at ADB, we have these industrial corridor development programs. We've identified these nodes with the various state governments, and those are the places where action is taking place. Those are the places where government have made an effort to bring in some anchor investors. Those are good places to put together skilling centers. But once again, I really believe you have to really push the private sector for this. Education is really the responsibility of governments, but when it comes to skilling for jobs, I think we're letting our private sector off the hook far too easily. They need to be paying for this a lot more. Now, where will the demand for jobs come from? And I think here, something that the report didn't pick up on, it's the issue of trade. There's really a lot of important potential from trade that I think we are not, we like to talk about, there's deglobalization taking place, et cetera, et cetera. There's a recent book which is talking about how India has missed the bus on labor-intensive manufacturing, and we think this is just too pessimistic. Here are some numbers, and I have to thank one of my colleagues who's worked with NCR, Sandeep Pohit, with input-output tables. And we were just, we requested them to just give us the numbers on direct, indirect job creation. And basically, here, we've put together 4 sectors, textiles and apparel, electronics, leather and footwear, IT services. And you can see that the maximum bang for the buck really comes from textiles and apparel. If you can get jobs going in this sector, this is going to create lots of jobs, directly, indirectly. But also the indirect jobs from the input-output tables. What are the educational attainments of workers over there? And no surprise, but the skills, the educational profile of those workers fits very well what you have in India, which is not that many very highly educated workers. So unlike services, IT services, fintech, etc., which some people are saying, that's what India needs to focus on, and that's well and good. India should focus on that, but India cannot neglect labor-intensive manufacturing. And the fact that there's scope to do this, this is just a simple chart which is showing the export shares of these 3 nations in global trade, in electronics and textiles and apparel. And you can see, even in a world in which global trade may be slowing, India's share is so low, and we know that China is vacating. this sector in particular. Why can't India be entering? So I think global trade really presents an opportunity. Final point I'd like to make, I'm really glad that one of the missions was on urbanization. And here again, something that to me was good news in the data is, number one, it's something that I'm not showing here, but when we've looked at just wages across rural India, urban India, small cities, big cities, what you find is that cities actually do a pretty interesting job in lowering things like the gender gap in wages. So you tend to find that the gender wage gaps they start falling as you move from rural to urban India and as you move from smaller to bigger cities. We also find in the data, and this is PLFS and NSS EUS, you find that jobs in firms with 10 plus workers are better jobs. They pay more. The returns to education are higher in these firms. So in other words, we think urbanization and this process of formalization, both very important, both need to be accelerated. They will lead to an improvement in labor market outcomes.
The work is organized. We have today gig economy or the platform economy, and more use of artificial intelligence and digitalization of the labor market. Now these changes necessitates that we have a very dynamic skill ecosystem. When we initiated way back in 2008, we never thought about these changes. And the kind of skill ecosystem that was developed then was only focusing on three issues: that how do we increase the scale, how do we improve the quality, and how do we make the scale aspirational. Number of initiatives were taken, and I think some of those initiatives have already been covered in the report. Now, but since then, the challenges have changed. Some of the challenges have been reported in the report, in terms of that you have a very limited uptake, then you have a spatial differences, you have a gender differences, these are there. But some of the issues and challenges which we are facing, which could be included in the report, are that there is an information asymmetry. The Chief Guest have pointed out the point that there are a number of multitude of schemes which are being run by various central ministries or state governments. But have you ever thought about that a candidate who looks into the various programs, how does he decide that which is the best program? Why we are facing that challenge that despite the fact that the government is spending so much of resources, we are not able to have a skilled manpower to that level. Because the candidate who looks into those various programs, he doesn't know. He has no information about the ranking of those schemes. He does not have. I think the report could throw some light on those issues, that how does the information flow to the candidate. That's from the supply side. But if you look at the demand side as well, the industry is also not very vigilant about it. They are also not very conversant about it. I just give an example. I visited a district called Madurai. When I discussed with the industry was not aware that there are training providers who are providing training on a particular job role which they require. And the training provider was not aware that industry required that job role. So if we are able to include this challenge of how do you address the information asymmetry in the skill ecosystem, I think that will go a long way to sort out the problem as far as the skill is concerned. The second important challenge, I think, which is covered to some extent, but which needs to be focused much more, is that there is a lack of demand for formal skilling by industry. Now, why they are not demanding? Because if you look at the structure of the Indian industry, it's very, it's occupied by the unorganized small industries where the workers, it's just on own account enterprises, is husband, wife, or maybe their relative or somebody. So they are not able to map their skills. If you're not able to map your skills, how will you get the skill training? It's very difficult. So we need to understand, because there's a lack of demand for the skill, so we need to create that skill. There's another point which is very important, that the large industry, they're also informalizing, they're wanting to not take the formal employees, they want within the formal ecosystem, they're hiring contract labor because they just do not want to continue to pay the long-term liabilities of them. As a result, they are not interested, because of the high attrition rate, they are not interested to reskill, skill or upskill their manpower. That is why perhaps
some of the reasons why they are not able to do it. The third important challenge which we could have included is that there is no mechanism to continuously assess the skill gap. The last survey, the environmental scan that was done was in 2016 by the NSDC, to just look into what kind of a job roles are required. At a pan-India level, at a state level, very few states are doing, though with the district skill committees coming into being, there is an effort on the part of the government to ensure that we have a very dynamic skill data available to us. We did start it in the Ministry of Skill Development, the Labour Market Information System, but it's still work in progress. Though there is a Skill India portal which does, but it does not capture both from the supply side and the demand side the kind of skills that we require. As a result, we have more of a supply-driven ecosystem than a demand-driven ecosystem that we have. Most of the job roles so far were very narrow. It's only now, with the coming of the new regulator, that we started thinking about that since there are changes in the labor market, it's being impacted by the technology, we need to have micro-credentials, we need to have knowledge-based job roles, we need to have multi-skills people, so that we are able to train people to meet the requirement of future of work. I think these issues could be highlighted and this could be covered in the report as well. Now, what we require today is a skilling ecosystem which is based on mastery, which is based on modularization, and I think which ensures mobility. Towards that level, I think Government of India has taken a number of initiatives, whether it is National Credit Framework, or it is a Skill India digital platform, or it is approving or improving the apprenticeship program. But there are still many challenges in these, because when you look at the National Credit Framework, it may solve the problem, but then given the fact that we have 30 plus odd state boards in this country, making them and bringing them together on one platform and ensuring that the quality that the industry is looking in a candidate who comes whether from the Meerut UP's board or come from the CBSE board or come from Tamil Nadu is the same. Because the credit is going to be the same, but whether the quality of education is going to be the same, that needs to be addressed. I think the NCVT is looking into the SOP and they are trying to address these issues that when you look into the National Credit Framework, it should ensure the industry should feel confident that a child, a youth who is coming from whichever board that they are coming with the proper quality. Then we also need to look into convergence policy. As the Chief Guest had indicated that we have multiple program, we need to have a whole of government India, whole of government approach. It should not be because the resources are limited. It's the same target group that we are addressing. And that is why I think the Skill India portal or Skill Digital portal will go a long way to ensure that the same candidate is not trained by various central ministries or by the state governments.
Thank you very much, Professor Nayak. Thank you, Dr. Sharma, and other eminent guests on the stage. What I will do in the next 10 minutes is try to look at this report wearing my economic journalist hat. I don't want to comment on the data analysis and findings, which are excellent, and many people here have already covered it in greater detail. Except at the end, probably I will try to just highlight 3 critical issues that came to my mind, which require further attention. Many years ago, almost more than 70 years ago, when a man called Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis, who was considered by Nehru to be a man who should decide his industrial policy, commanding heights of the economy, when he was asked again to set up the research system in the country, he, quite to the contrary opinion at that time, decided that research institutions in the country should not be in the government, should be completely outside the government system. And I think that was something that we should all be grateful to him for about. And his logic was very interesting. His logic was that research institutions should not be in the government because they are going to provide you the safeguards of governance. And if you do not set them outside the government system,
then they will not have the wherewithal, the ability, and probably the independence of making those observations on policy making, observations that impact policy making and the evaluation as well. So when I read this report, Professor Maulanabi's words rang in my ears, and I said that it is not that the raw data is not made available by the government, but what was missing, in my view, and it was a long gap. The last report of this nature came in 2016. Was the analysis of the data by an independent organization which takes the effort to analyze what it means and what it does not mean and what kind of policy discussion you have. So that, to my mind, is something that ISD needs to be complimented for, and ILO needs to be again also complimented for being associating itself with this initiative.
The new labor codes likely to play in affecting the issues that have been highlighted in this report, particularly the conditions of jobs, poor quality jobs, and the rights of youth to make certain demands with regard to their jobs and quality of jobs.
Yeah, the chief economic advisor in fact said that that entire increase in self-employed category should not be, and particularly within the women, should not be interpreted purely as under distress or something. I just want, on this comment, I just want to know the reaction of the team, of the team leader.
Okay. Yes? Just hang on, I'll come back to you.
Financial crisis 2007 and even after this post-COVID, most of the European economies, US economies are seeing overheated and the unemployment rate is quite low. But that is not the trend we see in India. It's a lot more informal migration and it's a lot more concentrated in few cities only. And the unemployment rate is still very high, so why is it that the capacity building and all that the startup policies are not functioning that effectively?
I'm Pratap from Social Work Department, University of Delhi. So just I would like to know if the report at all covered the youth who are disabled. Disability, did it cover disability?
Thank you. Thank you. We've had 4 questions. I'll go in the order I saw the hands. So, what you said, that person there and the lady there.
Hello sir, I am Balakrishna from BITS Pilani. So I have a question related to this gig and platform economy workers, as most of the youth involved in these kind of sectors nowadays. And what are the reflections of these gig and platform economy workers for this report? Because from the NSS also, as you know, it's very difficult to collect this kind of information. Or is there possible to include those kind of information later on in the NSSO?
Okay, I'm Dr. Pooja Mishra. I'm from Reliance Management Technology. So like Dr. Nageshwaran mentioned that the migration that has happened effectively should not be interpreted as distress for female labor force participation in agriculture. I know there's another report which goes back and talks about it, where they've said that the male population is moving to cities, and that's where that's the reason why females are moving into the villages, which is fantastic. At least females are getting employed. But instead of going back and patting ourselves on the back, should we not try to move those females also to more productive employment opportunities, is my take on that.
I heard Professor Srivastava about the fact that we're seeing overqualified people, graduates, and working for underqualified jobs, where their jobs are not as per their qualifications. So how does it correlate with the RTE? And what do you see the trend going forward? As in, are people stepping out of school wanting to invest in higher education, technical graduation, which is becoming expensive by the day?
I would just like to check one aspect as to what is the total employment that is coming into the field, and out of that, how much is going to be employment. That is one. Secondly, if we are employing youth, instead of employing a more experienced person by industry, then is there any comparison of salary levels as to why should some industry employ a youth rather than an experienced person?
This is about the 13.2 slide of the presentation. I was just seeking a clarification in terms of it says that from 47% self-employed people, there was this marginal increase in the employer, lot of increase in unpaid family. I'm just wondering, is it all the women who are because it said that unpaid family workers was largely women who migrated. So is it largely the movement of women workers? So if they were self-employed, but there is an increase, so if they were productively or economically also in a better position in terms of before 2019, what were they doing, and from where have they migrated to the unpaid category? I also thought that on the report you have mentioned MSMEs, but so MSMEs have a large chunk of employment. In fact, in the data was they actually employ the second largest employers after agriculture. That's how the enterprise survey pitches them. But in terms of giving good employment, MSMEs have a lot of limitations. So have you worked on those side of limitations also? Maybe the report would tell me more. Thank you.
Want the presenters to begin or the panelists?
Well, we could do it either way. We can begin with the presenters. So, fine. Why don't we begin with the presenters, and Alak and Ravi, and share in that order. Please select the question you wish to address.
About self-employment, this is again Chief Economic Advisor also pointed out, and as has been pointed out by several other articles, several other researchers. I think this increase of 6% self-employment, which has come largely from unpaid family labor. Unpaid family labor is mainly accounted by women. And by the way, when you do the analysis, wages, incomes, poverty lines and all that, best employment in India is regular employment, followed by self-employment and then casual employment. Self-employment is a very heterogeneous category. It consists of very good employment, also consists of all vendors which you see, supply driven, all that, vegetable sellers, all that. So I think I won't pass judgment, but self-employment, both in self-employment.
State employment, employment report for Tamil Nadu, employment report for Rajasthan. It might be a very good spin-off, but all these things are easier said than done. In conclusion, let me say it's been rich fare this morning, and all of us owe a debt of gratitude to those who wrote this India Employment Report, because I think we have barely scratched the surface. It is a treasure in terms of the evidence it provides, in terms of the analysis it does. And while it's easy to say that there's not enough prescription, we should not be disheartened, because almost no one has a clear prescription of what needs to be done. So I'd like to compliment the authors, the team, the Aish team, for having done such a splendid job, and I'm sure this report will be read for years to come, as the first two were, 2014 and 2016, because they are a real source of evidence of analysis.